So when they came and raided us a few months after the fact, we weren't surprised because we realized that they had a full-blown agenda to make sure that this discovery didn't hit the light of day.
Right. And that discovery, can you just detail what though that study was finding and showing?
Over 3 times more effective than your standard antidepressants.
For Rebel News, I'm Tamara Ugolini here in Cobourg, Ontario, and I'm joined by filmmaker Todd Michael Harris and David Steffen, whose family co-founded the Truehope vitamin supplement that has really reversed a lot of mental ailments and mental health afflictions faced by primarily his family, and then kind of morphed into this extended supplement that helped countless others. That was until Health Canada tried to get their hands in the cookie jar and hit them with a fine for not having a DIN number, so a drug identification number. And Todd has done this documentary that's kind of detailed and compiled the trials and tribulations faced by your family and others and this whole process. And it's called Epiphany. Now, just to start there, how did you come up with the title Epiphany for this documentary?
It was actually called the Truehope story because it was this story of where Truehope came out. But then we kind of shifted to battle because the film really is about this long battle that they had with Health Canada. Mm-hmm. And, it's not a boring health film. It's actually a very exciting film. And then the great thing about the tour is we see the film. That's very exciting. You learn where this came from. And then David gives a wonderful presentation on anything anybody is concerned with or their health. And it's fantastic. Like the just what David talks about after the film is worth the price of admission. It's amazing. Yeah.
Right. Well, and to talk about that drug identification number and the Truehope supplement, why was that an inappropriate thing that Health Canada was doing with this particular supplement?
Well, when it came down to the drug identification number issue that they charged us with, Section 3132 of the Food and Drugs Act is what they said that we were breaching. It was completely inappropriate because it was a multivitamin mineral supplement. That's all it was. The only difference is that it was correcting bipolar disorder. So it was after the first study came out of the University of Calgary, and that made national news, showing that these vitamin mineral supplements were far more effective than antidepressant medications. That's when Health Canada decided to come in based on its application. And it wasn't just, they were charging us for operating without a drug identification number. It's that they were trying to remove our existence out of Canada. Right. And at one point in time, they actually told my dad, if you want to continue doing what you're doing, perhaps you want to move south of the border.
And these supplements don't come with the long list of side effects that the pharmaceutical actual drugs that require that drug identification number come with, like things like suicidal ideation, violent behavior, all of these things. What are some of the most compelling story, or maybe you can share one of the most compelling stories that you saw where this drug was able to really help and give new life to someone suffering from a mental health affliction?
So with the supplements, which are merely just vitamins and minerals that you're getting on a daily basis out of your food, just not in adequate amounts anymore. We've seen phenomenal stories time and time again. I mean, obviously, just with our own family, we've seen significant stories of turnaround from my sister being in and out of the psych ward on a regular basis to going on and living a normal life, writing a book that would eventually get sold in Costco, chapters. She would go on to have 3 more children, though she was given the advice to have an operation to prevent her from becoming pregnant. So, we see those types of stories very often. When we see the most compelling stories, that's when we see the success surrounding people generally with schizophrenia because of how debilitating that particular condition is. Now, don't get me wrong, it's not an easy road. It's a bit more work, requires a lot more support. They need a great support team around them to help them to make sure that compliance of the uptake of the supplements is ensured. But it's phenomenal to see how people in that type of situation can go from being completely debilitated, in and out of the psych ward, to living a normal life, pursuing their career, their, going back to school, that type of thing.
Right. Now, obviously, this has become quite a controversial topic now, and
Yeah,
Health Canada
totally.
has taken great lengths to shut down this vitamin and mineral supplement without this long list of side effects that go along. As you were doing the film and interviewing and compiling all of this, what stood out to you as the most compelling reason why this is such a controversial topic?
Whew, that's a tough question. I mean, Health Canada is owned by Big Pharma. We know that because of how much money they take in from Big Pharma. So if you can read between the lines and you have any kind of vision, you can see all they're doing is protecting Big Pharma. And it's interesting because Sean Buckley, David's lawyer, in that case and in his own family case, he said if he sees anything that Health Canada is attacking, he writes down what it does, the name of it, and he goes and gets some because he knows it works. So they only attack things that work.
And they've really been attacking the natural health product industry for years, but especially has come to light through the COVID handling. And we saw regulations and liability completely waived or adjusted to rush to market these novel modified RNA products. Meanwhile, something that is nature derived has received such harsh backlash from the regulator. Can you make sense of what's happening here?
It's really hard to make sense of what's taking place out there when we take a look at, like you said, there are these different modalities, if you will. I don't even know if you'd call it a modality, but these different pharmaceuticals that are being pushed without proper safety data. And yet there's products like ours that are proven to be safe, and they are actually really quite effective in correcting or treating mental health conditions. And yet Health Canada would look to take those away. When we contrast that with the fact that the Canadian government is funneling millions and millions of dollars every year towards MAID, it's quite a shocking contrast that they're promoting premature death, assisting people in suicide, and yet they're spending millions of dollars to try to suppress something that would prevent someone from ever considering taking their life. It's hard to make sense of it unless you came to realize that perhaps they wanted you dead,
Right.
And that's a hard thing for a lot of people to swallow.
Well, that MAID, the medical assistance in dying, is now one of the top leading causes of death here in Canada. It's up there. I think the most recent data showed it was in the top 5, up there with stroke for Canadians, which is a very concerning trend that is only going upwards. Now, that said, Health Canada, when I say they took such aggressive measures, one thing that really stood out to me was essentially you had a SWAT team brought in and were raided by Health Canada. What did that look like for your family? And was that a turning point for you to say, wow, this is a lot bigger than what we were ever expecting?
Well, things had really built up for about 3 years previous to the gun-drawn raid happening on our headquarters. And so we weren't overly surprised when it happened because we saw that Health Canada had an agenda to make sure that we were not in Canada. They had already suppressed the science. They had shut down the studies. There was a double-blind, placebo-controlled trial taking place in Alberta that was funded by the Alberta government, over $500,000 study. And Health Canada had already come in and shut that down. And so when things had finally escalated in 2003, my father just said, you know what, we're not gonna obey you. We're not gonna adhere to your cease and desist orders. We're going to continue to supply this to the Canadians that need it, just like our family needs it. And so once my father had set out to do that, to just finally ignore Health Canada after he'd attempted to work with them for the better part of about 2 years, we saw how Health Canada had started to escalate their efforts. And that started actually with seizures at the border, where they seized the product, prevented 3,000 Canadians from having access to it. They were aware that they were putting Canadians in harm's way. They were aware that they were causing suicides. This was being told to them by Ron Lejeunesse, who is the head of the Alberta chapter of the Canadian Mental Health Association. So they had it on good authority that they were literally killing people through their actions. So when they came and raided us a few months after the fact, we weren't surprised because we realized that they had a full-blown agenda to make sure that this discovery didn't hit the light of day.
Right. And that discovery, can you just detail what, though, that study was finding and showing?
Over 3 times more effective than your standard antidepressants.
Without the long list of side effects.
Well, with a great list of side effects being good health outcomes, because it turns out when you give yourself the proper nutrition that your body was lacking all along, not only will you find a correction in mental health conditions, but your entire body will thrive. And so, but without the negative side effects that you would anticipate to see with psychiatric medications.
Yeah. Now, the raid happened in 2003, so we're, roughly 20 years later. Why was this an important story to tell now?
Well, I did a film called The People versus David and Colette Stephan, which we toured last year, which is the story of David losing his child and then the state coming after him and trying to blame him. It was very confusing as to what happened to his son. But so I did that film, and everybody was like, well, what's the backstory to this? What's the backstory to this? And so when we came off that tour, it was in my head, okay, I've got to make the backstory, which I knew quite well. And I think it's equally as powerful, and it falls in line with what I'm trying to do with my filmmaking career, which is, help Canadians to see what's actually going on in Canada, which is going on in the world. It's no different anywhere else, but it's going on big time in Canada.
Now, there is another point of relevance to all of this as well. And Health Canada made this known, I believe it was probably the last week of September 2023, when Health Canada was coming under fire for the new regulations that they're proposing against the natural health industry. And so Dr. Sharma, who was being interviewed, if you will, by the Standing Committee on Health, when she had to justify Health Canada's actions, they actually resurrected CBC's false narrative surrounding the death of Ezekiel, my son, bringing that to light, saying it's situations like this that cause us to need to put these types of regulations into place. So it's actually really quite relevant today because we are facing a major crisis on our doorstep in relation to access to natural health products. And we've seen it in other countries. New Zealand just had some major things take place there where some of our products can't even cross the border anymore based on the levels of nutrients within those products. And so we're seeing this really take place across the world right now. And Health Canada is moving quite quickly with it, that likely by the end of this year or next year, we're going to see some major changes in relation to what's available to us on the health food store shelves. And Health Canada just created relevance there again in relation to bringing the story of Ezekiel into this, using a false narrative from CBC to justify their actions, as well as the fact that they've actually been, as of recent, attacking us and making us remove the 35 medical journal publications that we had on our website, removing those so that Canadians don't have access to that information to decide whether or not these supplements are for them.
Right. In comparing and contrasting the mainstream media coverage that you had, 20 years ago, your dad was on the news and making the news. And this study, funded in part by the Alberta government and taking place in Alberta, the mainstream media seemed to be all over it at that time. How is that different now?
My job back then within Truehope was actually to do all of their media work, to do all the video work. So as part of that was cataloging anything that came off of mainstream media that was in relation to medications, psychiatric drugs, but also Truehope news. So I got to see all of it. And what was really interesting is that up until 2010, the mainstream media would report every time that a new study came out on our supplement, whether it was for autism or it was for depression, bipolar, the mainstream media was covering it, except for CBC. Every mainstream outlet would cover it, but except for CBC. CBC never did one positive report on us. In fact, they went well out of their way to try to drum up negative news against us. So that was really telling. And so that lasted up until 2010. We didn't even have a marketing department because the news was covering what we were doing. We never had to advertise. We never had to do anything to get the awareness out there. And then once 2010 hit, there was a shift and we would no longer get positive media at all. in relation to mainstream news outlets. It completely stopped. So I'm not sure what happened in 2010, but that was the pinnacle year where everything shifted, and no longer would they cover the groundbreaking news on the research that was coming out. And that's when actually some of the best research was coming out after that, was the double-blind placebo-controlled trials, and that was happening, and yet the mainstream media wouldn't cover it.
And yet trust the science and trust the experts, they say. Just to wrap things up, where can people find the documentary? And I understand you're headed on the last leg of your tour here. You'll be in Ontario, and then I think Alberta's next. So where can people find you if they want to join any of your screenings that are happening over the next several days and weeks, or watch for themselves?
Yeah, we're in Kingston tonight, Ottawa tomorrow, and then Thunder Bay, then Regina, then Lethbridge. We finished the tour of the movie meal in Lethbridge on the 15th of May because we came from Vancouver Island, so we've come all the way across the country now. But you can go to matadorfilms.ca, and the list is there. And then we'll ramp up to a big online release, which everybody can watch together somewhere end of May.
If you would like to support our work and this kind of journalism, you can do so by sporting some sassy swag from the Rebel News Store. Head on over to rebelnewsstore.com to check out all of our latest and greatest designs, and use code TAMARA10, that's TAMARA, number 10, at checkout to save 10% off of your total order. That's rebelnewsstore.com, code TAMARA10 for 10% off at checkout. Thanks so much for your support.